We are Myth Vision,
home of Myth Vision Podcast and Myth Vision Radio Group. My co-host is Derek Lambert. I'm Dr. Luther G. Williams. You'll find us on Facebook, where you can like us and catch up on the latest research and upcoming guests. On YouTube, go ahead and give us a like, subscribe, comment, share, link to us, and send us a blip from your location in cyberspace, okay? And don't let that PayPal and Patreon punk you on the gridiron. Nail them as they try to get by you and show us some love. We sure do appreciate everything that you do for us. Now, when I say Myth Vision brings you the very best researchers in religion and culture on the world scene today, I'm writing a check that I don't have any problem cashing, guys. Even our surprise guests, like this next guy from across the pond who says he never misses a show, will show you just what I mean. You know his books, movies, TV programs. Some of you out there mention him whenever you're stating the obvious. He's known across the world for his powers of observation and logical reasoning. I'm talking about Dr. John Watson's intimate friend and Mycroft Holmes' little brother. I make him mad when I say that. Please welcome the world's greatest super sleuth and pride of Scotland Yard, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock, what are you doing here in the States?
I've been considering the issues on your show. Obviously, gentlemen, men don't walk on water. Camels don't squeeze through the eye of a needle. But as I have told you time and again, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. I'm just full of all this excitement to solve all of your show's mysteries.
Oh, yeah, sure, Sherlock. You sound so excited, my cocky friend. However, I don't think you should take the evidence presented by today's special guest lightly. Even you might be shocked at what we talk about. I call him the Sherlock Holmes of scholarship because he asks the questions that others miss and studies the clues they don't see. He's John Knight Lundwall and holds a doctorate in comparative myth and religion from Pacifica Graduate Institute in California. He's a writer, author, and lecturer, managing co-editor for Cosmos and Logos, Journal of Myth, Religion, and Folklore, and a founding board member of the Utah Valley Astronomy Club, which is a nonprofit organization that partners with state and national parks to run their astronomy programs. Dr. Lundwall is the project leader of the Archaeoastronomy Project of Fremont Indian State Park and has assembled a team of researchers to investigate the archaeoastronomy of Fremont petroglyphs. And by the way, he has an excellent video on Fremont archaeoastronomy on YouTube. Dr. Lundwall lives in Utah and is an avid backyard astronomer, astrophotographer, and hiker of the outdoors. His major area of research is the epistemology of orality. That is how oral societies went about obtaining knowledge. And his research also focuses on the creation of ancient myth. He is the author of Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. This is his third appearance on our show, so please welcome warmly Dr. John Lundwall. John, it's good to have you back. How are you?
Oh, good. Thanks. It's great to be back, guys. Thanks for having me back. Luther, I've decided I need to take you to all my family reunions so you can introduce me. Everywhere I go, I gotta drag Luther around and say, Luther, take it off.
John, I appreciate it. Just make sure the check's in the mail,
cool.
man.
Who is this guy?
Well deserved, my friend. Well deserved. You're very busy this year. I know that. You've got trips planned to Egypt, and we'll learn all about that. We're gonna talk all about that at the end of the show, okay? But last time you were with us, you walked us through the imprint of astrotheology in the Bible, and we got a lot of calls on that show. And we want to continue with those investigations. So let's just ask a couple of questions just to kind of warm us up today and get right in. You know what we're going to do, John. We're going to turn you loose like we did last time. But everybody wants to know about the book of Revelation. Very popular book, popular prophecy is out there. And in this book, you have all these different media, which we wouldn't know about if it weren't for you. But the dance is in there. It talks about a scroll. It talks about the Lamb's Book of Life. What's going on with these media technologies in Revelation? Are they competing or complementary or cooperative is there a story to be told about all these things going on in the book?
Well, once again, Luther, I don't know if everyone wants to know about the Book of Revelation. You're my people, because if you want to know, then you know that's what I like to think about. But you know, I suppose I could just start by sharing the screen. Let me just get my PowerPoint up and running, guys. All right, just as a quick recap, because we talked about this in a previous podcast, the medium is the message, and this links off your question, Luther. And I just want to go over that when the messages we share with each other are important, but how we share them with each other, the medium by which we share them with each other turns out to be even more important, because it's the medium that structures culture, it's the medium that structures the brain, it structures how we think. And I thought I would just give an example out of history between the transition between the scroll and the invention of the codex. Of course, the codex is invented by the Romans. Julius Caesar probably used an early version of the codex. But certainly the codex is the medium that Christianity uses as a world religion. Christianity is the first world religion that begins in full literacy. Not that its adherents were all literate, but very few of them were, but it's the first world religion that's managed by text, and it's managed by a specific kind of text, the codex, which is popularly used by the 4th century and forward. Well, there are reasons. Well, there are vast changes that start to occur in human thinking just from the transition from a scroll to a book. And I'll just briefly talk about that. You know, ancient scrolls could be 70 feet, 100 feet long. They could have dozens of different texts on them. But for the most part, they were liturgical texts. You read them in a communal context. People would gather. There would be a reader, a crier, some group leader who was literate. He would read a portion of the scroll, and very often he would sing or chant a portion of the scroll. The congregation would sing and chant returns. This was all ritualized. You didn't have to be literate in order to participate because you had the songs and chants memorized. Well, just the physicality of the scroll, you could only write on one side. You couldn't write on the back side because as you move the scroll along, that would smear the ink. But more interestingly, I mean, you couldn't cross-reference text on the scroll. You know, what happens with the codex is you cut the scroll up into pages and then you bind it into a binding. And now you can just flip the scroll page to page. So one, you can use front and back of each page. So that actually makes, despite the fact that manuscript codexes, creating them were very expensive, it actually is more economical than creating scrolls. But more interestingly, you can now easily cross-reference information from page 3 to page 20, from page 20 to page 50, whereas in a scroll, you couldn't do that. You would unroll a little bit, and if you were on the 50th foot of your scroll and you wanted to remember what you had read on the second foot of your scroll, you had to unroll and re-roll and unroll and re-roll back. It was very cumbersome and very difficult. But more, you know, also the scroll follows a pattern, and it's a cosmological pattern. You unroll one end and you roll the other end, and this is in synchronous, analogous to the sun rising on one horizon, setting on the other horizon. And actually, as you read a scroll, you would read part of a scroll, part of a text that was lined up with a certain week of your calendar year. The next week, you'd read a different part, and it all followed your calendar. It all followed the seasons. It was all ritualized. This all changes with a book. All that goes away. Suddenly, you know, it's no longer a cosmological pattern. You're just reading from page to page. You can cross-reference, and that's the real thing, is the brain starts thinking analytically. It's now, instead of ritually following a text, it's now cross-comparing texts. It's now swapping between pages and swapping between books, because the books are small and portable and much easier to facilitate than a scroll. And so within a few centuries after the invention of the codex, you actually start getting human beings thinking completely differently. This is what changes. The medium is the message. They start thinking analytically. Now, this process starts with the invention of writing. It starts with the invention of reductive alphabets, but it starts flowering with the invention of the codex, and it takes its full form with the invention of the printing press. But so just in these two mediums, we can see a large shift in how human beings relate to information, transmit information, and how we think. We start thinking analytically, comparing text as opposed to ritually following text. And of course, this evolution of thinking is occurring even today, because we're no longer a book culture, we're an audiovisual internet culture, and that has consequences.
All right, so just to recover some of what we went over before with the resurrection, or the story of Jesus walking on water that we find in 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. Remember, there is one tradition, scholarly tradition, where scholars believe that the story of Jesus walking on water was a displaced resurrection narrative. Jesus first appears in the book of John to the disciples by the sea, or the Greek can be translated on the sea. So when the disciples first see, this isn't Mary at the tomb, when the disciples first see the resurrected Lord, they see him appearing by the sea or on the sea. And that same Greek phrase is used in all the sea walk narratives. And so there's a group of scholars that we went over in a previous podcast that said, look, what we have with the Jesus sea walk narrative originally was a resurrection narrative. But the resurrection narrative got split up. And so you have Jesus appearing on the sea after his death and his resurrection. But then you also get this part where Jesus walks on the water and saves the disciples from death, right? So the disciples are being saved from death, from a storm. So this theme of death and on the sea and resurrection were once combined in a unified story, but they got split up. So there is that scholarly tradition as to the origin of the sea walk narrative that we talked about last time. And what's very interesting about that take of the story is it is a direct link to all the previous pagan systems of dying and resurrecting gods. Well, maybe not all of them, but the vast majority of them in the Near East and Mediterranean area are gods that are reborn on the sea or by crossing the sea. Osiris is reborn out of the waters. We have Heracles, who has to overcome death by crossing the Great Sea. The same theme we find in Jason. We find this theme with Gilgamesh. We find this theme actually in mythologies on the other side of the globe. And so it is a Chinese, it's a sort of universal mythological template that in order to be reborn, one had to cross the waters or walk on the waters. And this is a direct link with our astrotheology. If, you know, one of the things you said, Luther, last time was that, and I really liked it, so I'm going to use it, that history for modern literate people is something that scratches an itch. It allows us to think outside of ourselves. Look, this actually happened in the past, and if it actually happened in the past outside of my own experience, then it must be true. And so that is how we think, and that's how literate people think, that if it happened historically, it is true, and if it didn't happen historically, it is not true. Well, the reason why astrotheology was a major cornerstone in the ancient world is because oral peoples have a different epistemology of truth. They don't think historically like we think. The thing that scratches their itch is the thing they observe in nature. The function in nature is the ultimate truth. And they try to repeat that cosmogonic or cosmological function in their rituals, in their society, in their religion. And so for them, the thing that is true, the thing that scratches the itch, is the thing they observe, and in this case, the thing they observe in the sky. And so I have this graphic here that we went over last time, where Orion rises and sets associated with the sun. He's followed by a boat, the Argo, and then we go through this whole resurrection cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, all from what you can observe happening in the sky with these stars and constellations associated with the rising and setting sun through the seasonal cycle. And so they observe that, oral peoples observe that, and they say, that is what exists outside of me. That is the ultimate truth. And so their myths, while we define them as untruths, as something false, as something non-historical, as something fairy tale and maybe even silly and false, they considered them to be representations of the ultimate truths. Remember, for oral peoples, truth is cosmic fact, not historical fact. And so how the stars, sun, moon, planets move across the sky is a reflection of the cosmic order which reveals ultimate truth. And in this case, with the constellation Orion, which we'll be getting into, this ultimate truth is disclosing a resurrection motif. Here is how life is born, and here is how it dies, and it's all displayed before us in these cycles of the stars. And so ultimately, they're getting at the same mystery that the literate Christians were getting at with their historical narrative of Jesus, but they were using a different epistemology to get there.
Appear out of the waters in some form as a symbol of rebirth, and they are rebirthed from the waters. And so this is certainly true of Osiris. His body is cut up and thrown in the waters, and Isis goes around and collects all the body parts out of the waters until he's reconstituted, except for his phallus. But the whole point is you journey through the waters when you regain your soul. I mean, in the Egyptian afterlife, everybody journeys in a boat that is being sailed through the sky. In fact, the boat, the rowers of the boat tend to be the planets or some other astrotheological personification. So the idea of Jesus, the Jesus walking on water story being a resurrection narrative, then links it to other pagan models that existed before Christianity, where the resurrecting deities appeared out of the water. So the whole point is, and of course, the resurrecting figure turns out to be a constellation in the sky. That's Orion. And I went over that here I have on this slide Orion and the Argo. Behind Orion is the constellation of the Argo, or the boat. In the stormy fall months, Orion is seen setting in the west as the sun rises in the east. The constellation of the Argo, or ship, is seen sailing on the waters as Orion sets. Orion is literally walking on the waters as the boat makes its passage across the horizon. I got this little graphic here, and that's, the Sea of Galilee. So literally, if you're looking on the waters at the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean Sea, you would see Orion walking on the waters at the fourth night of the watch. As the sun rises, he would be descending in the waters while the boat was floating on the waters. And then we have this reversal. That's the summer and fall months. By the winter, late fall and winter months, which are the stormy months, the months of storm, Orion rises in the east as the sun sets in the west on winter solstice. Orion is disassociated from the rising sun, is now seen with the setting sun. In the account of John of Jesus walking on water, Jesus he walks on the water, and then he performs this rather astonishing miracle, and that is he instantly transports the boat across the shore so that they are out of the storm and they're instantly safe on the other side of the sea, right? Well, the point is that may have been The original metaphor was the disassociation of Orion from the rising sun. He's now transposed to the other side of the shore. That is, the sun is now setting when Orion sets, whereas before the sun was rising when Orion appeared. Do you see?
Okay.
He's transposed himself across the horizon to the other shore, which is, from east to west with the rising setting sun. This whole thing, by the way, is why he's associated with the resurrection, because for most of the year he's associated with the rising sun, but then for the winter solstice part of the year he's associated with the setting sun, and so he's disassociated from the rising sun. He's now associated with the setting sun at the winter solstice, which is your season of death and rebirth.
Right.
And then back in the spring, he gets reassociated with the rising sun. And so the entire process of the constellation as it appears with the sun, with the boat, by the way. So here's another graphic: Orion at winter solstice before dawn. On winter solstice, Orion sets as the ship rises. So, and winter solstice is also where the stormy season. And so, I quoted Diodorus, who mentioned that Castor and Pollux were the stellar saviors who were prayed to by the sailors to abate storms. And Castor and Pollux are that's Gemini, right above Orion. Gemini and Taurus are above Orion. So you get this tableau of stars in the sky: Gemini, Orion, Argo, and they all are variously associated with the sun, either rising or setting, and with storms. The idea is the entire story of Jesus walking on water could have descended from this complex of astrotheological situations which are revealed in the sky, which are a repetition of death and rebirth, because Orion is associated at one point with the rising sun, with another point with the setting sun, only to return with the rising sun. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are you following me?
Yes, so far, but I can't wait till you get to the point about Peter. What's the implication about participation here? Lord, if it be you, bid that I come on the waters to meet you. What's going on there?
Oh, Peter was just a show off.
Now let me.
yeah, probably right.
I gotta dump.
He was partially successful, right?
He was partially successful.
I gotta dumb it down just for a second here, because my slow mind has a hard time making sure I got this correct. Orion is resurrecting, so to speak, when the sun is rising in the sky. Now, this is not just talking about one morning, correct? This is talking about the rising sun through the year, correct?
Well, at the time of Jesus, because the stars slowly shift over time, at the time of Jesus, at the fourth night of the watch, one of the details all the Gospels give is Jesus walks on the water at the fourth night of the watch, which is right before dawn. So right before dawn, through the summer and early fall months, you will see Orion walking on the waters in the east as the sun rises in the west. Okay? So as the sun rises, Orion is now just on the waters, on the horizon. And then, of course, as the sun breaches the horizon, the stars disappear behind the sunlight, right? Mm-hmm. By the winter solstice, this scenario has changed so that Orion appears rising from the waters as the winter sun is setting below the waters in the west. Okay, Orion has switched shores, right, from the sun. Now, in all these systems, guys, the winter solstice sun is associated with death and resurrection, because that's where the sun turns its path. The sun rises on different spots on the horizon through the year, and when it rises in its most southerly position, that's the winter solstice, and then it turns and starts rising north again. And there's a weather patterns that change as a result of that. I mean, that's our winter. And so death and rebirth is very often associated with the winter solstice sun. And so the point is, the winter solstice sun is a metaphor for death and rebirth. Orion, I'm going to talk about here in a second, is also generally the constellation associated with the Savior God for death and rebirth. And there's specific reasons for that. Let me just cap this up. Orion is heavenly shepherd. Orion was connected with the sun. He transposes the celestial shores as he's seen rising or setting on the horizon with the rising and setting sun. Orion was connected with the sea. He was the figure who had to cross the great sea to find rebirth. This was the celestial ocean, represented by the southern aquatic constellations. I'll talk about that in a second. Orion was connected with salvation and rebirth. Several savior gods were represented by the stars of Orion, including Orpheus, Hercules, Mithras, and Osiris. So we get these similar patterns. I'm going to get back to your comment and question, Derek, but I just am reminding listeners from the previous podcast that we have another motif that turns out to be rather important, and this is the Greek Sphinx. And I cited Heraclides of Pontus, who said that there are 3 roads that the dead travel in the next world. One is by Leo, one is by Scorpio, and the other is by Aquarius. Well, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are the iconography of the Greek Sphinx. The serpentine tail is Scorpio, the leonine body is Leo, and the human head is Aquarius. And the Greek Sphinx was almost always found at tombs. That's where they put it. And if Heraclides is right, then we understand why they put it at tombs, because it was the guardian of the paths of the underworld where the soul found rebirth. Okay? This is all astral theology. And there's some system being revealed here that when you die, your soul ascends into the sky, and it can take different roads. And in order to get the correct road, you have to be properly initiated. And if you are, the Leonide Sphinx will be your guardian. And if you're not, the Leonide Sphinx will eat you up, right? And so here is the other side of the sky, by the way. Scorpio is on one side of the sky. The other side of the sky is Taurus, Orion, and Gemini. And so they are also seen as a gate of the dead. And the reason why, gentlemen, that Orion is well, actually, before I get into the next slide, I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question, Derek?
Yes. Yeah, it was really basic. Simply wanting to know about the rising and the setting and how it's connected to the sun and why. But yeah.
If you're not familiar with the sky, this conversation might be a little difficult. And it turns out a lot of the people who deal with astrotheology aren't familiar with the sky. And so they make,
not good.
I know they make these arguments, but they never take the arguments anywhere other than, oh yeah, this story is just based off the stars and it was for agriculture and it had, so it's not true and we don't have to believe the Bible. Actually, something else is going on entirely. So why would
John, this Leonide Sphinx, incorporating the features of Leo the lion, Scorpio, and the other is Aquarius. Okay, if we looked at those as the cardinal signs, which we see in Ezekiel and we see in other mythological writings, the one that's missing is Taurus. The bull. Taurus is the one. Isn't it interesting that the Egyptians were a Taurian society, the bull perhaps the most revered god, and so if that was a point of reference, it would make sense that the Leonide Sphinx would cover all of the others. It's sort of like saying, okay, well, you got 4 possible perspectives or points, and wherever you are, you're looking at the other 3. Well, the other 3 are represented in the Leonide Sphinx. Am I making any sense?
No, that's right. That's right. I mean, look, there's bull imagery. I mean, there are bull sphinxes in the Near East. And the cherubim in Ezekiel has 4 heads: head of a lion, head of a bull, head of a man, and head of an eagle. It's the same. It's the 4 points in the sky we're talking about.
Right.
And so the cherubim that guards Eden with a flaming sword is an astronomical metaphor. It's an astrotheological metaphor. For what? You know, the cherubim stood at the Holy of Holies. So the high priest, when he entered the cubic Holy of Holies, he had to pass the golden cherubim who stood there, you know, as the guardians of the next world. Well, that's what this Greek Sphinx is doing, standing at the tombs. It's the guardian of the next world. And the Egyptian Sphinx standing at the Great Pyramid is the guardian of the next world. So all this is being drawn from a similar cosmovision that all these religions share. And we have simply lost the basis of the metaphor for them. They do belong to astronomy, but the roots of them have been lost. So I'm going to dip our heads down the rabbit hole, and we're just going to take a peek and see, because there are 2 parts in the sky that are almost always universally mythologized. Cultures all around the world, it's quite amazing. The cultures all around the world pick 2 points in the sky as part of their underworld mythology of rebirth. The reason why they do that is because the 2 points they pick are very important. So here's point 1. This is Orion. Taurus is right above him and to his right. Gemini's right above his head. The Argo, or ship, is behind him, rises behind him. And then there is a long stream of stars that are really hard to see as a constellation, but that's the constellation of a river, a body of water called the Eridanus. And Orion literally has his foot on the waters of that constellation. Okay, well, it's really interesting that in the myth of Heracles, when Heracles finds the secrets of rebirth, he has to sail down the Eridanus. That's the river he sails down to find the secrets of rebirth. When Jason does the same thing, he sails down the same river. They're sailing down a constellation. So the river is in the sky. Interestingly enough, so this is your entrance into the underworld. Heracles and Jason descend into the underworld on their boat from Orion down the Eridanus to the celestial South Pole, which I would argue is represented by the star Canopus, the boat, the ark. So, just as a parenthetical, in Polynesian mythology, the entrance to the underworld is the star Rigel, which is the foot of Orion in the beginning of the river Eridanus. So the Polynesian tradition matches the Greek and Egyptian tradition, which is, that's really interesting. Why is that the case? Well, we're looking here in the sky as one of the gates to the underworld. Scorpio is another gate, which is on the other side of the horizon, right? And then 90 degrees to our left and right, that's Leo and Aquarius. Those are your 4 cardinal directions. Well, Orion is almost universally mythologized as a humanoid figure around the world and is associated with resurrection. Well, why is that? Well, Orion sits in the sky at a very interesting place. Do you see this graphic? Do you see that blue line that's going above his club and transects the Argo?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
That's the Milky Way, okay? I'm just representing that as a line. The green line is the ecliptic. That's where the planets move, and that's where the zodiac is at, right?
Right.
So where the Milky Way and ecliptic cross was a gate of the dead. And that's why we are always finding Orion showing up as a god of rebirth, because he sits at the crossroads. He sits at the crossroads between the zodiac or ecliptic, where the planets are moving, and the Milky Way, that blue line. The white line is the celestial equator. So Orion is actually in the center of these 3 cosmic zones. And so that turns out to be a very important spot in the sky, and why cultures all around the world mythologize it, and remarkably, it tends to be consistently a constellation of death and rebirth. So according to most of these oral beliefs, the soul leaves this material world and ascends to the Milky Way through the planets. So it follows this ecliptic green line until it hits this gate, and then it goes on to the road of souls, which is the Milky Way, hopefully to paradise. Now, we can make all kinds of arguments. Why would they think that? Why did they create this, this complex cosmography and all these stars and constellations? Truth is, we don't know. I mean, there's going to be, when certain constellations rise, when the Earth is reborn, they'll associate that constellation with rebirth. And so part of the celestial journey has to deal with these heaven-earth correspondences. But part of them are just esoteric. We've lost them. We don't know how they came up with them, why they came up with them. But we do know they were there. And Orion, therefore, just sits at this major juncture in the sky. And of course, below him is that river Eridanus, which is, again, very often part of resurrection mythology. It's actually everything below that white line, the celestial equator, is the Apsu. That's the ocean of the underworld. When Gilgamesh crosses the Great Sea, he's crossing. Here's where he's moving. He's moving from Orion down to the celestial South Pole, I would argue. Okay, probably to the island of Utnapishtim, which is probably Canopus. I can't confirm that. That's a hypothesis, but we are dealing with an astrotheological model, and everything below the white line is thought to be the salt water, the Apsu. Everything in the northern celestial sphere is thought to be the eternal realm, the sweet water, right? And everything in between, that's the ecliptic. That's the earth. That's the material realm. And so Orion, therefore, sits between, right in the center of all these zones, and therefore is personified as the God in control of these three zones. And thus he tends to be one, representation of a resurrecting God.
John, Orion reminds me of kind of like a man who's guarding waters at a paddle wheel. I can't help but think of the image of a wheel. You know the types of wheels that were on the steamboats long ago? Those paddle wheels?
Yeah.
Imagine one with maybe 12 compartments, sort of like the Zodiac. You have a flowing river, and the purpose of that paddle wheel is to direct the waters of the river. So it's almost as if the river goes by, the paddle wheel will say, okay, we're going to challenge that. We're going to channel that water so it can be used. Orion is there to receive the waters as they come off the compartments of the paddle wheel so that they're useful. I wonder if at some level, man, people are thinking about this, if that's in our psychology and deeply embedded in there. And we actually have used it for architectural design and things that we do.
Well, that's probably true. I mean, look, human beings have been around for at least 100,000 years, probably 200,000 years. And so we have tens of thousands of years of oral thinking that have sort of, even though our brains have rewired and we think differently, we have a very long tradition of our brain synapses working in a specific way. And, just because we invent science doesn't mean we can walk away from our evolutionary roots. So, I hear what you're saying. What you said actually sparked an idea, and that is this that blue line is the Milky Way, and that was seen as a river or even a ocean in the sky. Oceanus, according to Heraclides, is the disk of the river of the Milky Way surrounding the Earth, right? And so, but the Milky Way was seen as a river. What most people don't understand is that green line, the zodiac, or it's called the ecliptic, that's where all the planets move across. The planets are always on the same plane in the sky. If they're never not in that plane, you got about 30 minutes to live, because that means the Earth is off its rotational axis. So enjoy the view for 30 minutes. They're always along that plane of the sky. And interestingly enough, we don't even know this anymore, but as the planets orbit the sun, they leave behind dust particles, okay? And the sunlight reflects off those dust particles. So in a perfectly dark sky, there is a band of light that follows across the sky around the zodiac. It's called the zodiacal light. So in a perfectly dark sky, you'll see a band of light of the Milky Way and another band of light around the zodiac, and they intersect right here. The two rivers intersect right here. And so, and of course, the planets are following along that band of light of the zodiac or the ecliptic. And so when the Egyptians portray them as paddlers in boats ferrying the soul to the next world, you're actually looking up at the sky, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing this river of light that the planets are moving along, and they connect with the Milky Way, which is the entrance into the eternal realm, right? And so this is actually viewable in the sky, but we can't see it. There's too much light pollution. I mean, down in southern Utah, I actually have seen the zodiacal light several times. I've seen the aurora borealis in southern Utah. I mean, imagine that. That's amazing that it's that far south. But the point is that green line and blue line turn out to have visible markers in the sky as rivers of light. And so that was thought to be, pathways out of this material realm. Well, there's all kinds of, I don't know what my next slide is. Okay, so here's the celestial sphere. There's all kinds of, the celestial cosmography of the soul in the next life is complex. We can't quite make it out. No one really understands what the Egyptians were thinking. I don't think the Egyptians understood, because, over 3,000 years, things evolved, things changed. They lost some things, they dropped some things, they added some things. But what we do know is that the entire sphere of the heavens was part of this grand journey of the soul to find rebirth in a lot of these astrotheological systems, okay? And so the soul would begin either at Orion or sometimes Scorpio. Those were your gates of death. Scorpio, by the way, is the other constellation that exists where the ecliptic and Milky Way intersect, okay? So those are your two gates into the underworld in most mythologies, and it's because that's where the ecliptic and the Milky Way intersect. Those don't change. Precession changes where the sun is in relation to the stars, but those two junctures are always the same, okay? And so they're mythologized the world over because of their positions in the sky. Well, the soul in Egyptian, in Greco-Roman, in Mesopotamian found rebirth by journeying from the ecliptic to the Milky Way, but it always had to find rebirth in the underworld. It had to descend in the waters. And so you get this motif of Gilgamesh crossing an impassable sea, Rama passing an impassable sea, Heracles passing an impassable sea. This is in Native American and Mayan and Aztec. The Popol Vuh, the heroes have to pass a great body of water. So we get these motifs, and somehow they're associating finding the secret to rebirth in the stellar south. And if you can do that, then your soul ascends to the stellar north. This is where we start getting into Leo and Ursa Major and the Big Dipper, where you will find your throne and crown of immortality. So, different cultures and religions had different cosmographies, but almost universally, they were cosmographies. Religion was expressed astrotheologically because the sky was the printing press for oral people. So this is how they conceived it. This is the itch that was scratched. Here's what's happening in the sky. That's the ultimate truth. We're going to pattern our theology after that. All this has been forgotten. Now we pattern our theology off of text, analytical thinking, philosophy, science and materialistic thinking, which our theology follows. And so we simply don't think this way anymore. So anyway, just as a recap, when we're dealing with astrotheology and rebirth, there's just a couple things we always have to remember. The underworld was in the sky. And you know what? A lot of scholars don't know that. A lot of scholars go around and they think the underworld is, in caves and represented as underground temples, and they were. But to most of these cultures, the underworld was always in the sky. It was a heavenly underworld. It was almost always related to a great sea, which in the Near East was the Absu. But that was the part of the sky in the stellar south, below the celestial equator. The secrets of rebirth were contained in the underworld. In other words, you had to enter that part of the sky, your soul did. And it was a very dangerous journey. And for whatever reason, everyone in all these world religions thought this is not an easy thing to do, and a lot of people aren't going to make it. You need to be ritually initiated. You need to know the correct path. You need to have a guardian that's got your back. You need to have the ancestors on your side. There's different ways that they had people help them in the next world.
John,
yes.
Real quick on that note, because something I've had a couple thoughts come.
Yeah.
Let go because it was getting so juicy. Right here, the secrets of rebirth, right? You must be born of water and then of spirit, right?
Yes.
Jesus teaching a mystery concept here that was probably foreign to a strict Torah Orthodox Jew, so to speak, someone who wasn't practicing the mystery religions, or at least aware of these concepts, maybe?
All right, hold on to your underwear, gentlemen. Being reborn out of the water is the Christian equivalent of the soul descending into the underworld sea to find the secrets of birth. And receiving the gift of the Holy Ghost, or being born from the fire, is the equivalent of the soul ascending to the northern sky to obtain their crown of eternity. So,
oh my goodness!
So the Christian liturgy is a refashioning of this ancient astrotheological cosmology.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good show. Who do I write?
My God.
This is good.
Well, it is.
Really good.
Well, it is what it is. But that, again, let me finish this, and let me just give a few points. The secrets of rebirth were contained in the underworld. Everybody in mythological systems who wanted to be reborn after death, they had to descend into the underworld. That's where it was, right? And as a Christian, you have to descend into the underworld by baptism. Okay? You're descending in the waters. The tomb was the womb. To regain rebirth required one soul to descend in specific locales in the underworld. Whoops, I accidentally tapped that twice. There were different roads or paths one could take, generally 3 roads. Cerberus, the underworld dog in Greek mythology, and Harry Potter, he has 3 heads. He has 3 heads because there are 3 roads, and each head guards a road in the underworld. One road led to Tartarus. This is the Greek tradition. Another to the mortal realm. That's where we live, and a third to paradise. Okay, and so souls were constantly on these roads, being born in to the mortal realm and leaving the mortal realm, and then taking a fork in the road, either to Tartarus or to paradise, depending if you knew the correct ways, if you were correctly ritually initiated, right? So in most underworld mythologies, there's either 2 or 3 roads in the next world. So, and then paradise, or the eternal realm, was associated with the stellar north, whilst the underworld was associated with the stellar south. Various cosmographies located the realm of souls in the Milky Way. So either way, you would end up in the Milky Way. If to become a star, in some traditions, you would become a god and a star, and live in the eternal realm as a god or as a star forever and ever. And various planets, stars, and constellations were markers for paths and gates for this celestial voyage. So here is, as far as rebirth is concerned, here is the broad general template of astral theology. A couple of things. One, when I listen to people talk about astral theology, they never address any of this. They say it's agriculture, it's the stars rising and setting. That's the basis of the story. And so I'm like, well, actually, no. Two, okay, so we just talked about Christian baptism being a repetition of this, right? But that, so the metaphor has changed. The liturgy changed. In the old days, by the way, they still baptized. They anointed people by washing and anointing and cleansing them through baptism and through other washing and anointings. Yeah, basically the text replaced all of astrotheology, and so everything was simplified into a couple of basic liturgies, and all the other liturgies were basically Roman liturgies of the Roman Empire. And so all this stuff gets dropped because this stuff is associated with your temple cult, and with oral societies. And so that just slowly gets drowned out. The Jews lose it, and there's an argument to be made that the first century Christians actually had this model in their theology, but it doesn't survive to when the Roman Empire takes over the Christian church. By the 4th century, it's gone. And so, and I'm going to talk about that for the second half of this podcast. So the point is, okay, so let's say Christian baptism is a reworking of what we're looking at here. Good, that means it's been retained. The theology for thousands of years, the mythology for thousands of years has been retained in Christianity. And by the way, both these liturgies are really going after the exact same thing, the mystery of rebirth, right?
Okay.
We're doing it from different angles. It's no longer attached to the sky. It's now attached to a text and to a baptismal font and to the ecclesiastical authority of the church. So it's different, but they're both addressing the mysteries of death and rebirth. They're just doing it from different epistemologies because we live in different epistemologies.
Right.
Any questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, kind of.
I've got one. What the hell's in that bag?
You know what? You got me really. Hey, I told you, Luther, we'd get in the.
You better tell him we're not going to move on until you
see this head.
Transfixed. Oh.
Look, I totally think that this is going. Okay, so let me go back to Orion, and you have the Zodiac Belt, and you have the Milky Way River, or the ocean. Well, yeah, it was the river flowing through. They're both crossing, almost like a cross point, and there's Orion guarding, if you will. These are the fire cherubim guarding Eden. Or another way to look at this is what I think is interesting is that when you look at Jesus, and there's a lot of Jewish concepts that Jesus was an angelic figure, a godly type of figure, kind of like a Christophany kind of concept in the Old Testament idea. And that would make sense astrotheologically, especially in light of him, if he is the Orion figure, so to speak, okay? If he is this heavenly figure in this mythology about the heavens. And so when we get into the New Testament, Jesus says, "Is it not written, ye are gods?" These interesting, almost heretical ideas, you would think, reading these texts coming from these Torah Orthodox strict guys. But he has these magi leading the way to his path of his birth. There's so many little elements of astrotheology. And then, is it not written that they would be sons of God? Like, that would make them gods, like you just said, in the heavens. And the stars are equated with that in Job. And it's like, I could see exactly what you're saying, but I wanted to say that just saying they're equating Orion with Jesus. I kind of want to hear more of the story explained, like how the myth is explained in the biblical text somewhat on that cross.
Okay.
Is there something, Jesus is Orion in this situation, and is he doing something or performing something specifically? Like, I know one thing that came to mind, maybe I'll throw your way, is he's going to resurrect, or is it the Father? Either way, there's this resurrection to eternal damnation and resurrection to eternal life. it seems like he's taking their souls out of the sea, which is a heavenly celestial body, and he's taking them and he's putting them where they belong, or guiding their paths that they chose. Could you go in a little bit of elaboration? Because that's really interesting that Revelation talks about that the sea gave up the dead. Well, what the hell does that mean? You know?